Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing? All right, I'm so happy to see you here. So it is a gorgeous fall evening. I couldn't believe how nice it was when I was coming. I mean, cold, but so beautiful. So we're really glad that you're here, in whatever the weather is. My name is Michelle Storms. I'm the Executive Director of the ACLU of Washington. Thank you. And I haven't been at a local Flights and Rights for many months, so this feels like being back home with the home crowd, so I'm really glad to be here with you all. How many of you all have done this before? Yeah, so like a lot of you. Great. And so those of you who are new, you are so very welcome. We are so happy to have you here and to share with you about the work that we do and why it's so important and how you can be engaged with it. I want to point out that if you haven't grabbed a pronoun sticker or a button yet, feel free to grab one. Use it here tonight. Use it wherever you are. And thank you for that. So as we move into this, I want to first acknowledge that we're on Indigenous land. We're on occupied territory of the Coast Salish people, and we acknowledge that in that occupation, people were lied to and cheated to, and their treaties were not honored. And when we think about this, we're thinking about the commitment that we have for justice and equity and fairness for everyone, to righting wrongs, and to moving us forward to inclusion and belonging and fairness for all people. I also want to acknowledge something happening on the national scene. We are seeing abuses of power, allegations of abuses of power, obviously at the very highest level of the federal government. And it's really, it actually just gets a little bit more ridiculous day by day, right? It's like physically, mentally, and emotionally painful. But what I want you to know is that the ACLU doesn't care too much for abuse of power. It doesn't care for government overstepping. It doesn't care for rule of law not being applied equally to all people. We support transparency, freedom of press, freedom of belief, freedom of speech, and the freedom to be a whistleblower. And we have stood up for whistleblowers, thank you, like Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, more recently, but for many years we have done that. We're only beginning to learn the extent of what the abuse of power looks like in this space, and we know there's going to be more revelations ahead, so fasten your seatbelts. But until then, we will continue to fight for policies that promote justice and that hold all of our leaders accountable. As you know, as we're coming into 2020, which will be 100 years old of the ACLU, in all that time, we have held our leaders, whether presidents, governors, legislators, accountable, regardless of their political party. We don't really care about that. What we care about is rights for all people who are in this country. And that's what we have stood for and what we will continue to lift up in our work. Nationwide, we have over 1,000 staff. This is really for those of you who've never been here before, or a reminder for those of you who have. And we have at least one affiliate office in every state of the United States, including Puerto Rico, including Washington, D.C. Some states like California have 3 because there's just so many people there. That's my home state, don't talk bad about it. And here's the deal. For all of us, in all of our affiliates, in all of our work, it is about lifting up the rights of all people, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, the country they're from, their gender or gender identity, all of those things. You're here, then you have rights. So we don't do this alone. We do the work with community partners, and we do the work with brave clients, and we do the work with people like you who show up and support us in myriad ways, whether it's your membership, your donations, you're responding to our activist alerts, and reaching out to hold your own lawmakers accountable. Whatever that is, we're doing that together. So a couple things to just call out before I introduce our amazing panel for this evening. As usual, we're streaming live on Facebook, and so if you want to, you can post your thoughts and your comments, hashtag ACLU Flights, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or something else that you're using. We want to put a special thank you out to Seattle Cider for pouring these tasty ciders. It's a fun switch up for the evening. Their tasting room is located at the Woods in Sodo, so if you're down there, check it out. finally, as always, a gigantic thank you to KEXP, our home. Yay! Like I said, for me, it feels really good to come back to the home space. Last week, I was with some of our staff in the Tri-Cities in Pasco. Yeah. Oh, see? And you weren't even there. You were there last time. But, you know, when we're there, we don't have a crowd this large. And I want you to think about your people in other parts of the state who share your values, but who don't necessarily have as many friends and neighbors who share their values with them. They were really happy when we come out. I was really glad to be able to be with them. We were talking about voting rights, which is a really critical issue in the central part of the state. So just remember your friends and neighbors all around the state. We're kind of lucky here in Seattle. Many people think about things in the way we do and think about rights and think about inclusion and equity and equality, but that's not true all over the state. Okay, so final other housekeeping items. As always, there's a raffle, so I hope you filled out a raffle thing. We have some nice ACLU treats for you if you're one of the winners. You must be present to win, of course. If you didn't get a chance, Jess in the back, Jess, is the wonderful person who can help you with that. Also, as always, we want to encourage you to become a member. Anybody here a member? Yay! Thank you. And so it's cheap, it's easy, and you allow us to be able to go in front of courts and legislatures and say how many hundreds and thousands of people are right there in our corner with us as we argue for rights for folks. So it's really important to do that. Okay, so we're, as a member, you're helping us to fight for LGBTQ rights, you're helping us to fight for immigration rights, voting rights, freedom of expression, racial justice, whether in the courts, the legislatures, or the ballot box. So we can't tire, we can't stop, and we won't. Even though things are a little daunting from time to time, you know, we don't get discouraged, because you know what, we can't. All the people who were in the movements who came before us, whether it was women's suffrage, whether it was civil rights, whether it was Stonewall riots, people rose up and fought for what they believed in. And that's where we are right now. We're actually at kind of one of those critical times where, like, really, we better be clear about what we believe in and what we are not willing to stand for. And so thank you for being here with us as we do that work. Okay, enough of the pontificating. Let's get into immigration issues. Okay, we've seen an alarming rise in agents entering, immigration agents, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, entering courthouses across Washington state, stopping people who are just trying to go about their civic duties, stopping them based on their skin color or whether they have an accent or not speaking English, perceived accents, their names. The Trump policy, which allows immigration officers to conduct arrests in courthouses, has proven to significantly damage the ability of our systems, our courts, whether it's police, prosecutors, defenders, or judges, to deliver justice. You can very well imagine that if you are experiencing domestic violence, but you know that your friend went to court to try to get a domestic violence protection order and got picked up by ICE, and so you're not going to go. And what does that mean? There is someone who's abusive who's going to continue to be abusive. This is the kind of situation that we're dealing with when people are afraid to go to court to be witnesses or to seek justice because there's a government agency that is actively interfering with their ability of the courts to deliver justice. So you're going to learn more about this from Enoka Herat, who is our ACLU Police Practices and Immigration Counsel. Who of you heard Enoka 2 years ago when she was talking about right? She's so awesome and really so clear about the whole history of our immigration system and the ways in which our immigration system has really been about exclusion and not about inclusion. We're also going to hear from, and also, let me just say, she played a pretty significant role along with other staff and with many partners all across the state in helping to get the Keep Washington Working law enacted last which is getting in the way of law enforcement inappropriately collaborating with immigration officials. So Enoka is joined today by Brenda Rodriguez from the Washington Immigration Solidarity Network, also known as WAISN, and Abigail Scholar from Central Washington Justice for Our Neighbors, to hear how today's struggles fit into our long history of racist immigration policy and what the ACLU and allies are doing to push back about that right now. So let me just tell you a little bit about Brenda and Abby. Brenda earned a bachelor's degree at Washington State University, double majoring in Spanish and Women's Studies, the minor in Comparative Ethnic Studies, because slouch. She was born in Mexico City and arrived in the United States at the age of 9. Reuniting with her migrant working family here, she grew up in Basin City, Washington. Who knows where Basin City, Washington is, other than Brenda? Okay, so 3 people in the front who are on the panel, they can tell you where it is. Brenda comes to her work with lived experience and supports our communities through strategic, impactful programs, including courthouse accompaniment programs, ensuring people can have their day in court, organizing rapid response hotlines, and organizing deportation defense efforts. At a moment when immigrants are facing relentless attacks and divisive rhetoric from the administration, Brenda co-leads a diverse and powerful network of over 100 immigrant and refugee rights organizations and individuals to educate and mobilize to defend the rights and dignity of all immigrants and refugees, centering the voices of impacted communities. So let's talk about Abigail Scholar. What a great name. She's been the executive director of Central Washington Justice for Our Neighbors since 2018, beginning of, and serves on the coordinating committee of the Walla Walla Immigrant Rights Coalition, also on the steering committee for All In for Washington, the steering committee for WAISN, and the WAISN Fair Fight Bond Fund. Has so much spare time. Abby is also a founding member of the Spokane Immigrant Rights Coalition and the Tri-Cities Immigrant Rights Coalition. She focuses her work on community organizing and has extensive experience in developing community-led programs and supporting leaders within the community to advance capacity building. Please welcome our amazing panel to the stage.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Enoka Herat, and it's so nice to see so many people showing up tonight on behalf of immigrants to educate yourselves and to learn more. Today we're going to give you some background on immigration enforcement in Washington, our legislative victories, and then some new challenges that we are seeing as ICE shifts its practices. You'll hear from all of us about what's happening really on the ground here in Washington State. But to start us off, we're going to share a little with our neighbors and some other people in this community and in this movement that we are part of here. This year, as Michelle mentioned, we passed this huge piece of legislation, the Keep Washington Working Act. And I love that I got some applause earlier. That makes me so happy because it is such a big deal. And it's something that we all did. When a piece of legislation passes, it really takes so many people from across the state, calling, sending emails to their legislators and making it happen. And so we showed up and it had an impact. And so today we're going to turn to our neighbors, or turn to someone next to you, and we're just going to talk for just a couple minutes and share about why you are here tonight. Why is this topic important to you and why are you showing up? Because that's what really makes a difference, and what we're going to need to do to get more change to happen. And so if you just take a minute now, we're going to turn and talk and find a partner, and we're just going to take a couple minutes to just chat about what brings you here tonight. Humor me. Thank you for chatting about that. Does anyone want to shout out like just a couple words? What brings folks here? A word here in the room? I'll say that for me, I am the proud daughter of Sri Lankan immigrants, and I feel, at this moment in history, I feel honored that I get to do this work and fight this fight on behalf of my community and my people. And it feels so good to show up in a place like this, to know that so many people care, and we often meet with sheriffs in very, very red counties, and we have to sort of make the case of why our lives matter, why immigrants are important and deserve to stay. And it's nice to see everyone in this room and know that in each of those meetings we're bringing all of you with us, with that support, with that backing. So it's really great to see, and thank you for showing up tonight. So I'm just going to give a really big overview of immigration in the U.S. So the estimated U.S. foreign-born population is about 40 million. 29 million people are estimated to be here with lawful status. So that's people who have green cards or are here on visas or have DACA, etc. And then there's 11 million who are considered undocumented. So those might be people who crossed unlawfully on the southern border, or it could be people who came into the country lawfully with visas, but then overstayed those visas and are considered undocumented. And in Washington State, this is what our immigrant population, this is sort of a snapshot. The top 3 countries of birth are Mexico, the Philippines, and China. And the majority of people of our immigrants are from Asia. And I get asked a lot, what is your vision for immigration? And in all the policy and advocacy work that you'll hear about tonight, this is sort of the idea that I keep in mind when we push for our policies, and that is we must decriminalize and demilitarize enforcement against Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. We must build an immigration system that centers the power and humanity of immigrants, recognizing that migration for love, opportunity, health, refuge is a fundamental aspect of being human. And I think the immigration system we have right now is incredibly flawed in so many different directions. And actually that's something that pretty much everyone in Congress can agree on. And it's based so much, the foundations of our immigration system are based so much on racism and on a desire to keep intact a white population. And so much of the current administration's tactic is to use our immigration laws to be as exclusive and as cruel as possible. And so those are the kinds of things we're fighting against. And I think a lot of people, when you listen to the news, you hear so much about immigration, and so much of that is what's happening at the southern border. And so we want to take an opportunity tonight to let you know what's happening in Washington and what immigration enforcement looks like here. So just overview, the Department of Homeland Security has 2 main immigration enforcement agencies. ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that's who we hear about when we hear about raids happening. ICE does interior enforcement, and they investigate, apprehend, detain, and deport non-citizens. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, controls the border. They have jurisdiction within 100 air miles of the border, and that regulation was put into place in the 1950s without much debate or anything, and now that covers 9 out of 10 major cities in the US, including New York City, Chicago, LA. It even includes Seattle, is within the 100-mile range, and so is Spokane, just inside the 100-mile range. So actually their power is really expansive. And this is what the pipeline looks like. ICE and Border Patrol, they investigate, then they conduct immigration arrests. From there, people are put into civil immigration detention, and then they're deported. They are able, a population of people who are detained are able to see an immigration judge and can fight for their chance to get lawful status, but many people are deported. And so when we look at each step of the way, for investigation, we see that ICE and Border Patrol are notified by state agencies, actually. And we've seen this, and this has sort of been the practice for years, for decades, that state agencies, police, jails, prosecutors, and courts, that they will give information to ICE. They'll just send information to ICE. And then ICE will request it, and then that's how they start investigating people in order to do an immigration arrest. You'll see the crossouts there because that's what the Keep Washington Working Act addresses. And that's why it was so powerful. It addressed state agencies, police, jails, and even some state databases. But there's still work to be done, particularly around prosecutors. And so that was a real immigration solution. And that was, it's actually a very systemic change. It changes the way that these agencies and these institutions have been operating for decades. And it's just amazing to see how the power really shifted. And so, we have met with sheriffs, like I mentioned before, in areas where ICE was very comfortable in asking jails to go, just go right into the jail and start talking to people. And of course, they were talking to the brown people in the jail. And because immigration is civil, not criminal in nature, they don't have to give people the Miranda warning. They don't have to let people know, oh, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be held against you. So they would just go and talk to people. And then we also found out that, that jails would just be collecting place of birth information and would just be sending that to ICE. And all those practices stopped. And we used to go and sit in these meetings with sheriffs and just really try to make the case, that the right thing to do is to protect people in your community, to build that trust, to make it so that people feel comfortable reporting crime to you. Isn't that what you want? Isn't that what law enforcement is supposed to do? So we'd go and try to really make these things, and sometimes, and we'd have wins, we would, and that was great. And then we would also use litigation. Our legal department, along with Columbia Legal Services and Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, would sue Spokane Police Department, for example, when their officers were just asking people their immigration status or were holding them until ICE came, which was unconstitutional. But it was just chipping away, and it was one jurisdiction at a time, And so with this state law, now we go to those meetings and they're like, oh, we don't want to do this. And we're like, but it's the law. And you can just feel the power in the room has just totally shifted. And that is what we are capable of doing, and that is systemic change. And that requires power building and getting out and talking to our lawmakers. And that requires showing up. So immigration arrests, this is family separation in Washington. This is what it looks like. Between November 2014 and May 2018, there are over 7,000 immigration arrests in Washington, and that's just by ICE. And 47% of those were from local jails and police officers. So again, that's what we were trying to target with the Keep Washington Working Act. But there are other arrests, of course, that continue. And CBP arrests, in Washington State, the ones we hear about the most, and where sort of some of these arrests are most common outside of checkpoints, border crossings, is the Spokane Greyhound Station. And as I mentioned, Spokane is just within that 100-mile range, and Border Patrol goes onto buses, questions people, particularly questions people of color, and then makes arrests there. And the community in Spokane has really done so much to try to push back on that and prevent that from happening. And we have lawsuits against Border Patrol there too. CBP is also conducting a lot of these courthouse arrests, and we're not seeing that anywhere else in the country, just really in Washington State where CBP is involved in that. And partly that's because the Spokane office expanded by 35 agents, and I think they're bored. So I think they're just going to help out their partners in other places in central Washington. Finally, after someone's being arrested, they get put into ICE and CBP detention. Before, we were seeing this expansion of county jails contracting with ICE and Border Patrol to detain people. So ICE would make an arrest in Basin City and then drive the person over to Spokane or Yakima, and then eventually they get taken to the Northwest Detention Center, the immigration jail in Tacoma, which has 1,575 beds. That expansion of jails, we also addressed with the Keep Washington Working Act. So they are no longer allowed to contract with ICE, and the current contracts, the big ones, expire in 2 years. The Northwest Detention Center, that, civil immigration detention is inherently harmful and unnecessary, and it hasn't been part of our history, actually. It's relatively new. And the 1,575 beds are full, and about half that population is actually asylum seekers brought up from the southern border. We also know with the county jails and they're called intergovernmental service agreements, the IGSAs, that Cowlitz County was renting their bed space to ICE to house juveniles, and it was kind of this black box of information. But that too will expire in 2 years. And then finally, deportation. For many, many years, all of the deportation flights leaving Washington State left from Boeing Field. Who knew that? Yeah, I mean, it's in some ways, I guess it's kind of obvious. It's right there, but it was. I think it was a surprise to the King County executive too, and other people in King County. And in 2018, King County passed an immigration ordinance that said no county time or resources will be used to support or facilitate detention and deportation. And so earlier this year, the county executive, after being pushed by a number of advocates, said, okay, well, we're going to try to put a moratorium on these ICE flights because we want to get out of the business of deportation. And one of the companies there that serviced these ICE flights decided spontaneously that they were not going to service these ICE flights anymore. So ICE got basically kicked out of King County and of Boeing Field. Get out of King County, right? And so almost immediately, maybe the next day, they shifted to Yakima. And in Yakima it's a different context, and the flights continue there. And but this all happened over the past couple of months, and so now it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, because as the pass closes, it's unclear how they're going to continue those deportation flights as regularly as they are now. Right now, they leave every Tuesday and Thursday to deport people, and so one of our tactics when it comes to ICE and Border Patrol sometimes is to throw sand in the gears and make the business of deportation more expensive and more difficult. So now that they have to bus people 3 hours to Yakima, that is definitely a victory too. And so that's it. So I'm going to pass it. That's just sort of some context to give you, so we're all on the same page with language, et cetera, so that Brenda can give us more context.
Can I ask a quick question? Is it a particular airline that's doing that, or is it a private?
It's all different charter airlines.
Okay.
Yeah. Something gonna go to? I'll be on the PowerPoint, next PowerPoint.
I have my own. Well, we can get started as we wait for the PowerPoint to come up. So I want to start off by really thanking ACLU, Enoka, Michelle, for inviting me over to this space and creating a space for us to have this very critical conversations about the way that Immigration, Custom and Enforcement, ICE, and the Custom Border Patrol, CBP, are working all across the state, specifically in Eastern and Central Washington. So I want to share a story about my family. As it was mentioned in my bio, I grew up in a very little tiny town, WAISN City, in the middle of nowhere, a small rural community, and I have been living there for over 10 years. And that is the community that my family currently still lives in and works every single day in the fields. I remember 10 years ago, it is the only time that my dad has been pulled over, and he's very proud of that. I remember we were in Pasco, and he got pulled over, and as soon as we saw the lights, those blue and red lights behind the truck, the atmosphere in the car just completely shifted. I remember he grabbed the wheel with both hands. I turned on the music. My brothers and I were never quiet in the room, but we all got quiet immediately. We sat up straight, and I'm pretty sure all of us held our breaths the entire time. The police officer came over as the older sister, and like many of us first generation kids, I was translating for my father. And he thankfully only got a speeding ticket, and the police officer drove away. And I remember just exhaling and being grateful that my family was one of those lucky families who didn't get ICE called on them, because that was a very common practice for communities to get pulled over and then get ICE called on them. We went home, and all my dad had to do was go to the courthouse and pay his ticket. And that gave such relief to my family, because we knew that no one had been arrested and that we were going home together. A few months ago, my younger brother, who lives in Connell, another very small community, rushed to the store and forgot his wallet. So he was driving to the store and got pulled over in Connell. And the police officer allowed him to make a phone call to my sister-in-law and for her to drive over to where he got pulled over and bring his wallet where he had his driver's license. So my sister-in-law showed up, and for some reason, his driver's license was not pulling up in the system. So the police officer didn't arrest him, but he did give him a citation, and my brother had to go to court. I remember that my brother called me, and I could hear the panic and the fear in his voice. So he explained to me what had happened, and I asked, so you didn't get arrested? And he said, no. So then I asked him, why are you still so, like, I understand that it was like a very hard experience, but you still sound very scared. And he said, Brenda, I have to go to court in Pasco. And Pasco is in Franklin County, which is one of the counties where we've had courthouse arrests. So I understood that what gave my family relief 10 years ago, that all we had to do was go and pay a parking ticket, was now giving my brother anxiety because he had to go and show up in front of a judge. So that is the reality for our communities in Eastern and Central Washington, and actually all across the state, where things like going to pay a traffic ticket have become something that you don't know if you're gonna come back home to your family. And thankfully, because we have an accompaniment program, we had volunteers that went with my brother, and he was able to go and take care of that civil matter, and then came home to my nephews that night, and he continues to be with his family. So I'm one of the coordinators for WAISN. Many of you have probably heard of WAISN or know my colleague, Montserrat Padilla, who's in the room. And WAISN is a coalition of 150 organizations statewide. ACLU is one of our members, CWJFON. And we're really here fighting to protect and further the rights of immigrants and refugees all across the state. The bread and butter of what WAISN does is that we have a statewide hotline where communities can call and report raids, report detentions, report sightings or activity of ICE or CBP agents in community. And then we activate rapid response teams who go to those locations and verify that activity, or when someone is already picked up and in the pipeline of deportation, those volunteers provide that family with moral support and connect them to the resources needed to be able to fight their cases.
Is this on? Yeah. I think that it's really interesting that both Enoka and Brenda started with their own immigration stories, and I have to own the fact that Brenda has called me out on this a number of times before, where when we come to speak together, I often sort of talk around what we do, and I sort of talk about the work but never personalize it. And I think that you could hear that in the introduction, and I think it's important for me to sort of like step into that a little bit and be honest and vulnerable and open in this space, because all three of us come from different places on the immigration spectrum. And, you know, Brenda was just talking about very intimate present day stories and recent histories. And I think it's also important to remember that like what's happening right now turns into like a family's historic trauma. And the reason I bring that up is because I'm of Mexican descent, my mother is a Mexican immigrant, and before I was even born, she had traveled to Mexico with my older brother to introduce him to the family and was flying back home to Canada. and the first port of entry was Chicago. And my brother was still nursing at the time, and the agents at the Chicago airport took my brother away from my mother for over 12 hours. And my father had to fly down from Canada to prove to them that this was his wife and this was his son. And I tell you that because when I had my son, he didn't look like me. He looked like my husband. I had a strawberry blonde, blue-eyed baby. And my immediate thought was, they're going to think I'm taking someone's child. What's this going to be like when I leave the hospital? So I tell you that not because, not out of some sort of like self-serving desire to look like something, but to be really honest about what is happening now is going to look like in 20 years, in 30 years. All of these moments and all of these interactions stay with all of our families, and they impact every single person in this room and your children. That being said, I'm now here. I'm one of the lucky immigrants who has a very easy immigration story. At Central Washington Justice for Our Neighbors, what we do is twofold. We offer free immigration legal services covering the full spectrum of all types of cases other than detained cases because we are small and we don't have capacity for it. And we also work on pro-immigrant policy change at the state and local level with partners like the ACLU, WAISN, and others. So we really focus our practice on a holistic view of what immigration advocacy and justice can look like and should look like. And I think the difference between what that looks like on the west side and what it looks like in central and eastern is really the significant thing that we want to hone in on tonight to hopefully open up everyone's understanding of how different it is just over the past. Oh, it's up now. Here you go.
So I want to provide some of the political context and some of the immigration context that's prevalent today. And it's important that as we talk about detentions and deportations in Trump's America, we acknowledge that deportations have been happening for decades. Family separation is nothing new. But what we have seen and the shift that we have seen is the increase of violence during those detentions. I'm pretty sure all of us in this room have heard or have seen in the news the stories of community members being dragged out of their homes, windows being shattered, doors being kicked down, U.S. citizens being arrested and detained. I think for me, one of the most impactful stories was of the high school student down in Texas, U.S. citizen who was arrested by CBP and held in detention for months, and the conditions that he was being held under were so inhumane that he considered self-deporting. So that type of violence and persecution against immigrants and refugees is also happening here in the state of Washington. We've had reports to our hotline of community members from Kent or Tacoma whose windows were being shattered because they were exercising their rights, their constitutional rights. People that have been dragged out of the courthouse because, again, they were exercising their rights, or because the agents refused to identify themselves. So I think that as we approach elections and as the year continues to carry on, we will continue to see the increase of violence against our communities during these interactions between ICE and CBP. To provide some of the context, Immigration, Customs and Enforcement, ICE, issued a memo in January of 2018 where they acknowledged that courthouse arrests were doubling all across the country, and where they also claimed that these arrests were increasing because law enforcement was not honoring the detainers, which Enoka talked to us about, And because they felt like officers were safer at courthouses because people get checked for weapons when they go inside. So they felt like that created a more safe environment for the agents. And they also argued that the people that they were detaining were very specific people, that they were not just profiling or detaining anyone that was going to the courthouse. While CBP has not publicly addressed their involvement in courthouse arrests, I think it's important for us to know that, especially in the state of Washington, in counties like Grant and Adams, they are very much active and doing arrests outside of the courthouses. Since January of 2018, right when the memo was issued, WAISN began to receive calls to the hotline reporting people missing, either at the courthouse or after going to the courthouse. Since then, we've had 89 calls reporting sightings of immigration activity and detentions outside and inside the courthouse, or as people were going or leaving the courthouse. And I do want to highlight that this number is nowhere near reflective of the actual number of the arrests that have happened in the state of Washington. At courthouses, only a small portion of those arrests get reported to the hotline. But what we have seen is the majority of the arrests are coming or are happening in Adams and Grant County, Franklin County, Okanagan, Yakima, Skagit, and Thurston County. Aside from family members calling to report these detentions, we also learn about them through community members, through witnesses, through public defenders who will call and say that they just witnessed their client being forcefully arrested. And we also learn through them, learn about them through social media when people record and those videos go viral. This is a report that was created in collaboration with the Washington Defenders Association, ACLU of Washington, the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, the Northwest Justice Project, CWJFON, and many others that really focused on the tactics and practices of ICE, and we were able to have a picture of where in the state of Washington these arrests were happening. So all those counties that are in red are counties where we have documentation of arrests at the courthouses. Just a few weeks ago, the UW Center for Human Rights, issued a report that they had been working on where they also confirm arrests all across the state. But I primarily want to focus in two of the paragraphs in that report, and you can actually find the report on their website. It's called Justice Compromise, and I really encourage all of you to read it. But particularly in Grant County, they confirmed that the prosecutor, Garth Dano, has an actual agreement with the supervisor of Custom Border Patrol in Spokane, where he agrees to share with them the dockets, the courthouse dockets from Grant County, so that officers can go and do arrests. They also share very specific information about people who are in their system. And because of this, CBP agents and ICE agents know when someone is going to be at the courthouse. They know at the time that they're going to be there. They know their name. They know the reason that they're going there for. And a similar agreement is also in Adams County, which is cities like Othello. So I want to share with you some of the stories or some of the reports that we have received through the hotline, because I think it's important that ICE will always say that they are targeting particular individuals or that they are doing investigations. But through the calls that we have received through the hotline, we have learned that they are actually racially profiling people, that because of this collaboration that they have with the prosecutor's office, they are arresting anyone who shows up to the courthouse. So I'm going to read to you some of those reports that have come through the hotline. In August 2018, a family member called about a young man who went to court on a Monday in Moses Lake, Grand County, for a hearing, and he had not been heard from since. In October 2018, a single mother went to the courthouse in Othello, Adams County, regarding a car accident she had been involved in. She never came home to her children, ranging in ages from 10 months to 10 years old. Her oldest son received a call from her 14 days later, reporting she was in Tacoma and had been detained by ICE as she was leaving the courthouse. In November of 2018, a community member was dropped off by his wife at the Othello courthouse at 1 p.m. She came back to pick him up at 2 p.m., but he wasn't there, so she left. She returned at 3 p.m. and then 5 p.m., and still there was no sign of him outside. When she asked the courthouse staff where her husband was, they shared that he never showed up to his hearing. She called her husband's attorney. The attorney shared that her husband had been approached by 3 men in plain clothes who he presumed were ICE or CBP officers, and he was taken away. When we searched for her husband on jail rosters, he appeared at the Spokane County Jail with a CBP hold. In November of 2018, a community member went to renew his license plates in Ephrata, Grand County. His wife waited for him in the car for hours until he called her from Spokane. CBP had arrested him. In November of 2018, a community member who went to court regarding a ticket never returned home. When her family called the courthouse to obtain information, they were told CBP had taken her to Spokane. In August of 2019, a community member called to report his wife missing in Grand County. He suspected that immigration had arrested her at the courthouse. In January of 2018, a community member was picked up on a Tuesday while he was at the Pasco courthouse in Franklin County regarding a traffic violation. His family went to the Pasco jail where they were told ICE had transferred him to Yakima. So those are some of the calls that we get to the hotline. For the very first 6 months, people were calling to report people missing. That was literally the language that they would use. My father, my husband, my mom went missing after they went to the courthouse. Can you help us find them? Then as we became aware that this was something that happened consistently, and we learned that it was ICE and CBP doing these arrests, people began to call reporting that they had witnessed people being arrested, men in plain clothes following people as they were leaving the courthouse. We learned that it was both agencies doing those arrests. We learned that they were going to the courthouse in plain clothes, so it was hard for people to know that it was ICE or CBP, that they were driving unmarked cars. None of the people detained that called the hotline had been presented with an administrative or judicial warrant. Witnesses, including public defenders, described the arrest as men in plain clothes targeting people with Latinx surnames as they walked outside of the courthouse. Witnesses also described those arrests as kidnaps, and in some cases have witnessed immigration agents use excessive force. ICE and CBP tend to sit inside the court hearing, so they're actually hearing why is it that people are there. Then they will follow the community member, and as soon as the person steps out of the courthouse, they will call their name, and they will surround them and arrest them and put them in those unmarked cars. They refuse to identify themselves, and a lot of community members have been thrown to the ground for asking them to identify themselves or asking officers to show their badge. Arrests are not limited to just outside of the courthouse. Recently, we have seen an increase of arrests happening in the hallways of the courthouses, outside of the courtrooms. And people have also been arrested on their way to the courthouse, they get pulled over, or on their way back from their court hearings. As you can imagine, it has created a lot of fear and a chilling effect all across the state for immigrant communities, especially in Central and Eastern Washington. People know that there is a likelihood that if you go to the courthouse, you will not come home. This is preventing courts from resolving cases, which leads to bench warrants and complicates people's immigration cases. So, because people, let's say, have a case for a DUI, and they go to their first hearing, and that person is arrested and taken into detention at the Tacoma Northwest Detention Center, the case, the judge doesn't know that. The judge doesn't know that this person was taken by ICE or CBP, so they'll issue a bench warrant. And that complicates people in immigration cases because judges in Tacoma then look and see that this person has bench warrants, so then they don't grant them bonds. Or people have to spend more money because they now have to hire an immigration attorney and a criminal attorney to help with their cases. It is no longer safe for people to resolve their civil matters, to access services, to appear as witnesses and file protection orders. It has undermined public safety in courts, and it continues to fuel the deportation machine that Enoka described to us.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're trying to do to work with these problems that we're seeing. And a large portion of what we do now is we have implemented accompaniment protocols and accompaniment services throughout Central and Eastern, and we're working with other organizations here on the West Side to implement those as well. Before I get into accompaniment specifically, I also want to give you a couple of sort of community-based stories. I think putting the humanity into what we're doing is really important so that you can see yourself and see your neighbors in this work. So as part of the Walla Walla Immigrant Rights Coalition, we've been doing accompaniment services since early 2017. And when I say accompaniment services, that covers a wide range of things, but primarily it means going with community members to district court, superior court, it can be going to the grocery store, it can be going to DSHS appointments. We go with them to sort of bear witness and to give them a sense of comfort. That doesn't mean that we get involved or prevent the work of a federal officer. We're not there to cause further problems for our community members, but we're there to provide a service. So one of the first times that I actually worked with WAISN was in, I believe, mid-2017. And it had to do with a young man, a DACA recipient, who was from the Tri-Cities. He had a young pregnant wife, and he was sitting in the Tacoma Detention Center, all based on a traffic violation. And when we sort of dug into the weeds a little bit, it became clear that he had actually been the victim of a hate crime. He was being chased by a couple of people in trucks and on motorcycles because he happened to have a Mexican flag on the back of his truck, and they were trying to get him to pull off the road. So in order to protect himself, he had driven off quickly and just happened to clip the edge of one of the motorcycles, trying to pull him off the road. He ended up in Tacoma. We reached out to WAISN, and we came up with a strategy to see if we could support him in his bond hearing at the detention center. And so we had people writing letters on his behalf in the Tri-Cities, in Walla Walla, in Spokane, and sending those letters of support to his attorney. And WAISN was organizing people to show up to his bond hearing at the detention center. And it was one of those great moments where it was successful, and he was able to go home, and he was home for the birth of his child, who was born, I believe, a week after his release, which is fantastic. But there are other moments where things don't go right. And in the over 100 or so accompaniments that we've done since 2017, we've had one go terribly wrong, and we learn from it, right? That's how you learn, sadly, is from when things go wrong, you figure out where the loopholes are and what you have to do better for next time. And this happened last December. 2 weeks prior, we had accompanied a young man to his appearance in Moses Lake on a traffic violation. It went smoothly, everything was fine. 2 weeks later, he called us back saying his uncle, who was in his mid-50s, also had to appear in court in Moses Lake. It was the last appearance on a traffic violation, and the two people accompanying him did not speak Spanish. He didn't speak English, so they had me on the phone when communication was necessary. Everything went really well. The judge commended the man for how well he had done for finishing this program. He gave him a certificate of completion. So they walked out of the courthouse thinking, this has gone great. Everything's gone smoothly. We're going to be able to take this guy to his nephew. It wasn't more than 5 seconds that they had stepped outside of the courthouse doors in Moses Lake that they were surrounded by 3 plainclothes officers. And they were not only in plain clothes, but they were dressed quite shabbily, and I would say that that was probably intentional because it was confusing for the people doing the accompaniment. They weren't really sure what was happening. They couldn't understand why these 3 strange people had walked up and were really trying to separate the community member from them. And they did what all accompaniers do. They pulled out their phones and started videotaping, and they started asking for judicial warrants. And the reason Brenda mentioned that, and I mentioned that, is that's what is legally needed for them to arrest someone. They need to have a judicial warrant. That's a warrant signed by a judge, which is very rarely present. So sadly, this person was taken to detention, and there was very little we could do from there. But I bring those stories up just to remind you of the stakes, right? Because those 2 accompaniers had to go back and then tell that nephew that they were sorry, that his uncle was gone, and there was nothing more they could do in that moment. But they could connect him to free legal services, nor other organizations that could potentially help. So I think I've sort of explained around our accompaniment protocol, but to be a little more specific, you can all do this. Every single person in this room has the capacity to do accompaniment. It's very simple, it's very basic, and it touches on our most basic humanity between us. So in Walla Walla, at CWJFON, and at WAISN, we all get calls daily of people who are afraid to go and get an order of protection. Women who are in abusive relationships, men who are in abusive relationships, seeking orders of protection but are too afraid to go and get them. And so they're presented with 2 options, right? They're presented with the option of going by themselves and potentially being detained and deported, or reaching out sort of into the ether and looking for help. And so we've had a number of those cases where we've gone with people to get their order of protection and things have gone smoothly. We've also had other cases where people's abusers have threatened to call ICE on them for going to get those orders of protection. So these are very real things happening. But what we do, generally speaking, is we gather groups together, we go to district court, we go to the county clerk's office. As I mentioned before, sometimes we go to grocery stores. People in Central and Eastern Washington have lived in fear for decades. The fear of discovery is real, and it's different there than it is here. On the West Side, there's a whole host of nonprofit organizations that provide pro bono legal services and can do advocacy work. Central and Eastern Washington have been a desert for a very, very long time, with a few offices here and there of nonprofits, but they're all at capacity. So the services that we're offering are really needed. I'm wondering if I'm missing a piece of the accompaniment that you want to touch on, Brenda. Basically, what we would like for you to think about is to think about signing up as part of an accompaniment team. And there are various entry points for doing that. There are really low stakes accompaniments you can do, like joining someone at a check-in, an ICE check-in when they have to go meet an ICE officer, or to get their biometrics done at a USCIS office, to going to district court. And we'll prepare you for those things. We'll do trainings with you. We'll get you ready for whatever needs to happen. And it really is very low stakes for you and really high stakes for your neighbors and the teachers that teach your kids and the nurses that help you in the hospital. I say that to remind you that, like, those are our communities. Those are our immigrant communities. Those are our DACA recipients. Those are our undocumented communities. They're the ones who keep us moving and keep us living and support us. And so it's our time to step up and really support them in the work that we do.
And I just want to share that there was an accompaniment that was done at the Kent Courthouse about 3 weeks ago, in the Church Council of Greater Seattle, the Jewish Coalition, where the volunteers who did the accompaniment, and everything went well. The community member was able to resolve their civil matters and made it home safely. So I called him a few hours later just to check in with him and debrief about the experience. And as he was sharing how he felt in the process, he shared with me that he not only felt encouraged, supported, but even the way that the courthouse personnel interacted with him was totally different than those times that he had gone alone. That he actually felt seen, that he actually felt heard, and that they were actually listening to what his needs were, because there were people standing along him bearing witness. So for us who have been doing accompaniment, sometimes a lot of the time we are in crisis mode, and it's all about ICE and CBP officers. That when he said that, I just kind of, like, it took me back a little bit, because I hadn't even thought about even the way that courthouse personnel interacts with our community is very much different than when there are people witnessing it. So it totally makes a difference to have somebody go with you through that process than doing it alone. If somebody is detained, we notify their family the night before. We create an emergency plan with them. We do a very detailed intake, and if the person is detained, we connect them with legal support. But we also have those very hard conversations on making sure that somebody is picking up their children, if they have any children at daycare or in school, making sure that all their important documents are placed in a location where one of their family members can provide it to the attorney, making sure that if they have any finances, a bank card or a savings account, that their partner has access to it, just in case we need bond money. And through those very hard conversations, we've been on the phone crying with community members, because the fear of deportation is very real, but in that particular moment, you know that it could be the last night that you spend at your home with your family, because the next day you have to go to the courthouse. And it has become such a fearful thing for communities all across the state, that as advocates and as organizers, we are attempting, by having an accompaniment program, we are attempting to make courthouses safer. But we know that we also need systemic change, and we also need more tools to be able to hold prosecutors and courthouse personnel accountable for that.
And the only thing I'd add is that we are hoping to introduce or have a bill introduced for the 2020 legislative session in Washington State around courts, so courts open to all, to make sure that prosecutors and court staff are prohibited from sharing information with ICE, to ensure data collection measures so that we know and we can start tracking when and where ICE and Border Patrol are coming to courthouses, and then also to require, as a matter of state law, to require that federal agents have warrants in order to conduct these civil arrests in and around courthouses. So we hope that in the next legislative session, you all will show up and help, send emails to your lawmakers and really help spread the news and send, get as many people as you can to do the same. And I think it was Cornel West who said that it's not hope that inspires action, but actually it's action that inspires hope. And the more that we do, the more that we see that we can make a difference. And so I hope you will think about volunteering, doing accompaniment, sending emails to your lawmakers, and getting involved as much as you can. So thank you so much for showing up tonight. We're going to be able to take some questions, and yeah,